No spoilies! No spoilies!
After putting it off for ages, I finally installed Lies of Pi, and I will be constantly referring to it as such because I misread the title on some promotional bits a while ago and it's too late for me now.
Yeah, what took you so long? Maybe if you hadn't been busy playing Portal Knights and trying to construct that golden middle finger, you might have gotten through me before the year was out.
Yeah, sorry about that. Well, not really, but I can pretend for your sake. I remember being intrigued by the demo for Lies of Pi, but I didn't actually get the game for a while because around that time Lords of the Fallen dropped as well, and I was debating about getting that instead, and in my indecision, I stressed myself out so much that I accidentally replayed Dark Souls 3 for the infinity-6th time. Sure, fuck it, that's a number. It's odd because I thought Lords of the Fallen was a 2014 game, and I was so confused to see it getting so much attention all of a sudden, and even more confused because I was pretty sure I already had a copy, so why I needed to pay another 60 quid for it was anyone's guess. That's a joke, by the way. I'm aware it's a remake, or reimagining, or something. I actually don't fully know what it is. Don't really care right now either. Ultimately, I didn't get Lords of the Fallen because Lies of Pi was cheaper and I wanted to spend the extra money on Dr. Pepper and chocolate coins. Also because of the two, Lies of Pi looked immediately more interesting. Lords of the Fallen just looked like another generic Dark Fantasy Souls-like, whereas Lies of Pi is a reimagining of a fairy tale using the Souls-like format, and more to the point, it reminded me of Steel Rising, which is a game that I actually like. As this year draws to a close, I wanted at least one more video out before I break for the new year. I won't be doing my top and bottom 5 video that I did the last couple of years because I haven't actually kept up with game releases as much as I wanted to, and at best I could do a top and bottom 1 list, and that's not really a list, that's just things. Partly a finance thing, games are expensive, and being a human being I need food to live, which is often an inconvenience, but largely because I went for another depressive episode this year, well, multiple depressive episodes this year, which made even engaging in hobbies that I genuinely love a significant chore. For most of the year I had like maybe 1 hour a day where I could deal with shit. Take care of your mental health, folks, it's bloody important. Anyway, enough of this woe is me crap, I ain't Jacob Marley. We have an interesting reimagining of the world of Pinocchio to talk about, and what an odd sentence that is indeed. But it's an odd game, so yeah. Let's talk about the odd game and how I went from, ooh, this is really interesting, to a feeling of passive dismissal. Oh, and whilst I've got you here, this will be the last video, since it's that special time of year where I pretend to tolerate the presence of other human beings, and if I want a prayer at actually having the mental wherewithal to attend my family's annual Xmas Eve get-together, I really need to focus on that and not video making. Anyway, Pinochi-Souls, let's talk about that, it's why we're here.
Come to me, feel alright, just dance with me all through the night, turn it out, close to you, I feel good, 'cause I just know feeling of you, give it to me baby.
Pinochi-Souls, or Lies of Pi, whichever you prefer, is a Souls-like, and we should all know what that means by now, but for newbies and people with colanders where your skull is meant to be, I'll quickly recap. Primarily melee-focused combat, a system designed best for one-on-one encounters, classes that literally only affect your starting state, and a stamina bar that rears its ugly head. God, I get so bored of repeating that, my New Year's resolution is going to be to say that less. Let's look at what Lies of Pi adds to the formula. After all, it's all well and good to develop a Souls-like, or any game using a well-established model, but it's pointless if your take on your chosen subgenre has nothing to add or experiment with. First of all, let's have a look at how the game handles weapon durability, since that's always a good thing to bitch about. For reference, my opinions on weapon durability could best be summed up by a giant middle finger suspended in orbit directly above the house of the first developer to ever come up with the concept, and several smaller middle fingers stationed around their mother's grave for the crime of birthing that cretin. The subtext is I don't like it. Lies of Pi has weapons that degrade pretty fucking fast, like in their starting states they can be used against maybe 10 enemies before your almighty greatsword winds up as useful in combat as the Costa Rican military. To combat this, you're given a tool that you can use any time to restore your weapon's durability so long as the weapon itself isn't completely broken. I, for lack of a better word, like this grindstone, not for the interesting thing it does where it can apply buffs to your weapons when you repair it with them, them with it, that's what I was trying to say, but because it shows the developers knew fully well that they included a shit system and they had to compensate for the problem that they put in the game themselves. Look, technically all video games are just solving problems that developers put there for you, but there's a difference between me solving the problem of, oh, how am I going to get to the other side of this monster-infested room, and me having to constantly solve for the shit add-nothing system that just makes combat more of a chore. So I won't praise the grindstone item because it doesn't need to exist and it only sits on top of an entire system that we would have been better off without. 9 times out of 10, weapon durability doesn't need to exist in a video game. I know I've gone on about this before, but rarely does such a system or mechanic add anything to the overall experience, rather just acting as an annoying roadblock. Imagine for a moment if Fallout 3 or Dark Souls removed the weapon durability system. You know what that would do to the experience? Fucking improve it, so I'll stop whining about weapon durability when it stops being a problem. Does that sound fair? No? Well, tough, that's what I'm doing. Christ, even From Software themselves seem to get that weapon durability is bullshit because Elden Ring ditched weapon durability completely and it was all the better for it. Still, I will concede that it's mostly about how it's implemented as a system and how it works with the rest of the game, though at the end of the day, Lies of Pi would have been 10 times better without it. It's not that it was hard to keep track of or anything, it's just an unnecessary obstacle to have to deal with, and it made combat more of an annoyance. Next up, let's examine the actual feel of combat. It's a rather important element, and for me, it's what these games live or die on. I've seen some folks online say that Lies of Pi is very Bloodborne-esque, and I agree on an atmospheric level, but gameplay-wise, it feels more like an unholy marriage of Dark Souls 1 and Bloodborne, so still kind of Bloodborne. Specifically, it was a malformed eldritch child produced when the two games copulated on top of a cursed mattress. I say that because Pinocchio himself always feels a bit slow, even when I kept his weight as low as I could, but at the same time, the combat generally rewards a more aggressive playstyle, so it feels a bit strange for lack of a more articulate descriptor. Still, strange isn't bad. You can block attacks, but unless you block at precisely the right moment, you will still take some damage. However, you can get that lost health back if you quickly land an attack on your opponents before something else hits you and damages you further. So it's sort of like the rally mechanic from Bloody Boy, only lesser as it only works when you're blocking as such. You can only ever get back a small amount of HP. It's an odd mixture, but I don't dislike it as negative as I sound. It's actually a weirdly good combination that marries the slow methodical pace of Dark Souls with the more aggressive combat of Bloodborne. Though the overall pace does lean more into the Dark Souls camp, whilst Bloodborne sits outside the camp shouting words of encouragement and occasionally masturbating in support. No, I don't really know what I meant by that either. The weapons themselves have some cool animations and sound effects that make them basically satisfying to use, and I do generally like their visual design. I get a good sense of their weight and impact as I strike, and I really like that. You know me, I like a good bit of feedback. I also like what the game does with the stagger mechanic. If you move into an enemy and their health bar turns white, you can do a charged heavy attack to stagger them and then move in for a critical hit. It makes getting those critical hits a lot easier for me because I can clearly see when the enemy is specifically vulnerable to it. Also, these critical hits very clearly studied under the Demon's Souls remake and are genuinely delightful in just how brutal they look. Staying on the display for a minute, I like how when you target an enemy you'll see if you're about to do a normal or a critical attack just by the little icon that is displayed. It's a bit small, but it's great for folks like me that don't read movements or body language very well, or positioning, or just who generally suck at video games. The weapons in Lies of Pi are generally quite good, though if you do choose the starting loadout that gives you that massive sword, then do keep in mind it has less range than you think it will. Hell, that small fire axe that I found later had better reach, but it's not a big deal, it's all part of the dance. As we're discussing a Souls-like, we now hit the part of the video where we say that the hitboxes are fairly liberated things, and learning your weapons animations and range is really important as it helps you develop your play style, just as learning exactly how much of the empty space around an enemy's weapon can still damage you, and how many times you should call the enemy a cunt in response. Usually 6 is enough. It won't be too hard to find a weapon that you like, and there's always time to get used to a new one. You see, the one thing I like to see in games is them allowing the player the freedom to effectively experiment with their current playstyle and even upgrade the weapons they're using without handicapping themselves later down the line. In the early sections, I swapped between main weapons 3 times, from the sword to the axe to the fiery glaive, and I found that I had plenty of upgrade materials to keep them all leveled up appropriately for the section I was tackling, so I could test out how a weapon feels and still be effective with it without having to travel back to a previous area to grind for more materials. It's also worth saying that you can make custom weapons by combining hilts and blades together at the workshop lady, which is a cool feature in concept. In practice, it's not executed terribly by any means, but it has a lot more room to grow, and chances are good that you won't ever need to actually do this because most of the basic weapons feel fine as they are, at least I thought so. I tried a few weapon combos on the training puppets in the hub map, and I found that no combination I could make was better than the fiery glaive I got from defeating the third boss, this big fiery motherfucker who looks pretty cool. I did try to be creative. I combined a giant pipe head with a small baton to make a quick but brutal club. I mixed a rapier blade with a lengthy axe handle to try and make a sort of short spear thing, but what I discovered was that your primary weapon animations are tied more to the handle than they are to the blade. Also, I know that a pipe head isn't a blade, it's just what it was called. At least I think it's what it's called. It's what I was calling it. It doesn't matter, you know what it is. With the blades animations being used for critical strikes, so really you're just swapping between the kind of animations you want for your preferred weapon. Again, it isn't a bad system, I just feel like there was a lot more that could have been done with it. Maybe if we could add some small trinkets to buff the weapon, or maybe specific combos had unique animations when built, then perhaps I would have given it more of a thought, but as it stands, it ain't a bad system, it just doesn't feel like it makes the most of the idea it had. I should mention that the handles can't be upgraded like the blades, so they do have that sort of Dark Souls infusion thing going on that lets a weapon better scale with a certain stat, so it is still useful, if not worth dwelling on. It works, and that's all I can ask for. At least if you don't like your weapon combos, you can dismantle and reassemble free of charge, and you can do so at the checkpoints as well as the repair lady in the hub, which is a welcome feature for certain. In fact, you can do a lot with the checkpoints, like fast travelling and swapping out what kind of mechanical arm you have, and you can level up with them until after you discover the hub, then you lose that ability and you have to rely on Lies of Pi's own brand Firekeeper to do so. It's frustrating. Because checkpoints aren't uncommon, so being able to power up without needing to pop back to the hotel, which serves as the game's hub, would have been super, but no. Sadly, Lies of Pi is being a bit of a dick and will gladly rob you of convenience where it is possible. I guess I am playing a Souls-like. I get the impression that the game wants to encourage you to actually engage with the NPCs and learn the story, but I will just say that the overall Souls-like approach isn't always a great way to go if you want to do a more direct story. As a format, I say it's best suited to games with narratives that go on more in the background, or that don't rely on you needing to know exactly what's going on to get from dungeon A to boss B. That's what I think anyway. Now you might have heard me say a second ago swapping out what kind of mechanical arm you have when talking about the checkpoints and wondered what I meant. Let me tell you. One of your arms is this big mechanical thing which can be outfitted with different models. Okay, I know both of your arms are technically mechanical, but shut up smarty pants, you know what I meant. There are a few different options you can have for the arm, like a hook that lets you draw enemies in for punishment, or a flamethrower that lets you roast them until they're just right, yum yum yum. Or the one that emits electricity, though after some experimentation I can say that the hook shot is the only useful one. It basically lets you isolate an enemy at your size, pulling them away from their group and making encounters less of a pain. Bosses or any enemy that are bigger than you are unaffected by the hook, but since most boss rooms are a short walk away from any checkpoint, you can always swap to a different cartridge for the boss fight, even though I never found this useful at any point, so don't bother. The flamethrower has such a short range that it's basically useless and it deals pitiful damage. It can set enemies on fire if you attack them with it for long enough, which damages them over time, but it takes so long to apply that effect that you're better off not bothering. Just throw a jar of thermite at them if you really want to set them on fire, that's far easier. The electric hand is a short range melee attack that, sure, can do electrical damage to puppets which are a bit weaker to such damage, but if the enemy is closing in on you then you may as well just hit them with your main weapon, which doesn't need a long ass charge time to be effective, and the default arm is just a fist that you punch with. Again, just use your melee weapon. The arm skills also use these little canister battery things to serve as ammo, and each use of a skill drains quite a fair amount of that bar, so you might as well just stick with the hook because it's got the best effect to cost ratio. The arm is cool in theory, but in practice its abilities are extremely underwhelming. You don't even get to use that hook shot to sort of get to high ground or anything like that. Now that would have been cool. Let me quickly wrap up my thoughts on the combat before we go any further. I think it's competent and with only a few issues keeping it from being really good. First of all, the lock-on is a bit unreliable and it has way more range than a game dabbling almost exclusively in close quarters combat would ever need it to. Next, I dislike the glowing enemy super attacks that can't be dodged, except when they can be dodged. They can only be blocked by a perfectly timed block since their whole gimmick is undermined by jogging out of the way. Or dodging. Apparently you can dodge a lot of them. I'm a bit mixed on the throwing items and the buffs you can apply to your weapons. The throwables are useful, but they deal so much damage that a lot of the time they'll just delete an enemy outright. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad that they're effective, I just don't think they need to be quite that effective. Still, good problem to have, I suppose. And the buffs are decent, but they don't last very long, so you need to be quite close to your target when you apply them to get the most out of them, and half the time I just couldn't be bothered. Still, it's hardly the worst Souls-like combat. It feels a bit slow for a game that's clearly encouraging a more aggressive approach, but it's not bad, and once your brain clicks, you'll be having a perfectly entertaining time. It's weighty and satisfying enough to keep you going, and that's all you can ask for. Next, let's talk about the hub. I usually dislike hubs in Souls-likes, since I hate needing to break off from my adventure to revisit a separate area with bugger all connections to the rest of the world where all the characters live. How does Lies of Pi fare here? Hotel Krat is your safe haven where you can talk to merchants and other NPCs, like Sophia, the lady that does your level ups, and as you explore, more and more folks will find their way here. The closest comparison I can draw is Dark Souls 3 Firelink Shrine, in that it's connected only to the tutorial area and the rest of the world takes place elsewhere, although at least the hotel is definitely part of the city and you can sort of see it from certain areas, so I'll give it some extra points there. I like the actual location. It's a posh hotel which feels very welcoming and safe, but I dislike needing to come back here to level up. Again, I get that the devs wanted us to have a reason to come back and talk to the locals, but I still dislike needing to disengage my adventure if I want to bring my character's strength up. Let me level up at checkpoints please, it's much more convenient. The worst part is I probably wouldn't have noticed if the level up option wasn't first available from the checkpoints, which I feel I should mention are called stargazers at some point, so you did this to yourself, game. Still, the hotel itself is a nice enough place. From here you can do your gear upgrades and purchase basic tools, though it would be nice if when I speak to the merchant or level up lady, I don't first have to sit and listen to them natter on for ages before engaging their actual service. That's actually what I'm here for. I return to the hotel ready to level up and Sophia's all like, oh, but first let me talk to you about how you're a different puppet to all the others, even though you definitely already know that, and this exchange won't actually reveal anything of note, so it's essentially just me wasting your time. And then cancel out of the interaction, so I have to engage her again to get what I came for. The game already shows us if people have anything new to say by the little icon next to the talk option in the dialogue menu, so it's not like we needed this. It's a small issue, I'll grant, but it happened just often enough for me to be irritated by it. Another thing that irritates me are the settings. Now, let me ask you, when you select the option to turn subtitles off, what do you expect to happen? You expect the subtitles to turn off, right? Well, Lies of Pi said,
Yeah, all the subtitles still happen, except for Jim and East, because he's got nothing to say that you need to hear, and fuck that logo and twat.
Which is true, granted, he just makes observations that anyone playing the game could already see, and his voice actor, well, they're not a bad voice actor at all, but I really dislike the choice they made here, because in a world set in the late 19th century, it feels odd to have someone who sounds more like a mid-tier commentary YouTuber talking at you.
Don't be alarmed. My name is Gemini. We'll talk later, when we're safe. I'm Gemini, your friendly puppet guide. Or friendly guide puppet? I don't know, one of those. I'm also a friend of Sophia's. Last time I woke up, Sophia was there because she woke me up. But I'm sure there are still other memories in there.
Jiminy mostly serves as a lantern to illuminate your surroundings and guide you in the right direction, but given how linear the game world is, it's hardly necessary. Don't get me wrong, linearity isn't bad, but the exploration in Lies of Pi amounts to...
Oh look, there's a small room this way that has one glowing rock in it and fuck all else.
It's got none of the, look, here's a passage that leads to a whole new area that you could have missed, and I don't really know how to feel. On the one hand, I appreciate the sense of direction, as I am the kind of player who will absolutely get lost in the world for hours, and I do have other shit to do in my day, but on the other hand, it makes the levels feel a little bit too static and kind of unimpressive. For lack of a better way of describing it, they all feel very video game. The game employs barriers to keep you on the right path, and keeping to that video game feeling, a lot of them really shouldn't be any sort of obstacle. If you can lift a giant glaive, you can probably move a suitcase, and given that P. Diddy can break chains on doors with a single punch, it's odd that he can't then drag a small bit of wood out of the way so he can proceed forwards. It runs up against immersion-breaking territory is my point. Still, Lies of Pi does a lot right. The boss fights, for instance, are really solid. Each boss is quite aggressive, but you're left with plenty of room to punish and dodge, and most bosses have one of these weird basin things outside their room, which you can use to summon an NPC Spectre to aid you in combat, which is great news for people like me, who are about as coordinated as a coke-addicted cuttlefish. I also genuinely like the look of the bosses. They're all creepy and off-putting in all the right ways, and they look like they belong in the world, and their movements are just the right amount of stiff to give the impression that you're fighting a big old-fashioned robot without handicapping the boss's effectiveness. There was only one boss I didn't like, the White Lady, and that's more because she was a cheap bitch who just wouldn't stagger and could land 10 stabs at a time way faster than I could physically react. The rest of the bosses are quite good though. Even later on, as you see more human bosses, or that one that looked like it crawled right out of Bloodborne, the game keeps them engaging to fight. One boss fight is with a gang of ne'er-do-wells, with one big boy possessing the main health bar, but after a certain amount of damage is dealt, each other gang member will enter the fray, and you don't have to kill them, you just have to lower their health enough to make them flee. It's a fight that's much better with the Spectre NPC than without. I suspect I was also supposed to bring the Fox Girl and Cat Boy characters that you meet, but I forgot to talk to them before I went into the boss fight, and then the next time I had to attempt the boss fight, I saw them on a roof and they swore at me, so I'm guessing they're mad about something. I imagine it would have made for a fun Battle Royale thing.
Bet you feel pretty dumb missing that opportunity, don't you?
Wait, does that mean there would have been a cool 4v4 thing?
Why not start a new game and see?
Nah, you're alright. Sorry about the noticeable drop in audio quality for the game's lines there. We forgot to record them, so we did it over WhatsApp because we're lazy. Listen, there's a lot of good stuff in this game to praise. I like how the block mechanic works, and I like that we can upgrade the limits on how many tools we can carry. I enjoy how it's usually pretty obvious when a boss is about to happen, and 9 times out of 10 there's a relatively risk-free path to them once you've cleared the main level and unlocked all the shortcuts. I like how when your healing items run out, you can charge up just by dealing enough damage to your enemies, though I do wish it went the Surge 2 route and just allowed us to recharge our healing tools completely. Although given the lackluster exploration and relatively short levels, it probably wouldn't come up much. What else is there? Well, actually not a whole lot. A good metric for me for how much I'm enjoying a game is by how much I think about it when doing other stuff, like drawing, or the laundry, or pissing on photos of the Prime Minister, and Lies of Pi sadly doesn't occupy my thoughts for long after I log off for the day. I couldn't usually be asked to play for more than 40 minutes at a time, and my own deaths in the game didn't inspire any real feelings inside me one way or the other, which I think means I wasn't really all that interested.
Oh come on, surely I inspired something in you. You played for like 10 hours.
Yeah, and in that time I explored several levels which were just samey looking streets, and the actual levels rarely did anything to challenge through their environmental design. It was mostly just, oh, how about a room with 4 robots this time, or what if a big dude attacked you who doesn't actually respawn after you defeat him and isn't anywhere near as dangerous as he might look. Don't get me wrong, the game isn't bad. I didn't leave with an upset feeling or an irritated feeling or anything like that. It's just that in this day and age, the Souls-like is a popular model to use, and if you are going to use it, you really need to shine. You need to do something new or innovative, and the whole Dark Souls but with old-timey robots is a neat idea, but Steel Rising did it last year and arguably did it a bit better. It had more enemy variety and a more explorable world with platforming elements and no fucking weapon durability. Of course, that's just my take. I don't know what the general consensus is for Lies of Pi, and I don't really care to look into it. Still, I don't want to sound overly negative, because I don't want anyone to think I don't like the game. I like Lies of Pi's gameplay, it's pretty good and engaging. The combat is entertaining, and the bosses are pretty good, and I really do like how the game looks. Graphically, the game is a fine looking, and it does have a decent soundtrack that amplifies the cutscenes and the battles. I also love the general aesthetic of the world. It appeals to that sort of steampunk style that I adore so much. Wait, is this this steampunk? I don't actually know if you would call this steampunk. You know what? It doesn't matter because I like it. It's just that in the world of Souls-likes, it's a fairly mid experience. It doesn't do enough mechanically to stand out, and the ideas it does have don't really feel like they were fully utilised. I like that there's a weapon making system, but the weapons you can get from boss souls, sorry, Ergo, I forgot to run that through the Lies of Pi Find and Replace, can't be dismantled and reassembled, which is a bit of a shame. Speaking of Lies of Pi's own brand of souls, you could probably guess that since we're playing a Souls-like, when you're killed, you drop your vital level up currency at the point where you died. Only this game does change one thing. If you die in a boss fight, the Ergo appears outside the arena rather than inside it. I do like that, that's good. I'm still iffy on the entire mechanic. I maintain that dying and having to re-clear an area or retry a boss are punishment enough, but oh well. It's a competent Souls-like for sure, but that's sort of all it is, a competent Souls-like. Not bad, but hardly spectacular. I've definitely seen worse Souls-likes, that's for certain. That Pharmacia thing and Mortal Shell both spring to mind, and I do appreciate the ideas that Lies of Pi has, even if it doesn't entirely know what to do with them. At the end, it's a perfectly entertaining game to play, and that's not bad at all. Listen, I know I'm sounding like a bit of a dick, but if you take anything away from this section, aside from the fact that I'm an unlikable douche canoe with no life, because that's pretty fucking obvious, let it be that I do think Lies of Pi is a pretty solid, often entertaining game to play, with just a few drawbacks. Lies of Pi follows the story of a puppet named Pinocchio, the creation of a roboticist named Geppetto who built us whilst grieving the loss of his son. Yeah, if you didn't know the original fable, then here it is. Geppetto's son up and died, and he built Pinocchio because he was sad about it. The general inspiration was the novel titled The Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi, with the main plot element being that unlike other puppets, Pinocchio is able to lie, which is a skill that he uses in a few areas throughout the game. Interestingly, this world includes its own version of the laws of robotics, just rewritten for puppets, though given that one rule is still the old don't kill people you dick rule, and Pinocchio goes around ignoring that one, I must say that it's odd people in this world get so hung up on his ability to lie. Then again, the puppet slaughtered everyone in the city of Krat, so I guess what's one more mechanised murderer to add to the watch list? We start the game awakening in a train car as Sophia speaks telepathically to us, and she tells us to meet her at Hotel Krat so she can explain things further. I guess whatever telepath plan she has is low on minutes or something. So we head over there, stopping on the way to kick the shit out of a giant circus robot, as is the custom, and as we arrive, Sophia tells us that we now need to brave the streets again to locate and rescue our beloved creator Geppetto, who apparently knows something about the current puppet uprising, or pup-rising, if you will. This is also where we get Jiminy, and I completely forgot to mention him on the first two drafts of this script because he is borderline useless and entirely forgettable. If he wasn't attached to our light source, then I would have likely completely spaced on his presence. As we explore the body-ridden streets of Krat, we encounter some humans belonging to a faction calling themselves the Stalkers. There is also a faction that's called the Bastards, which isn't actually relevant at this point in the script, or at any point. I never revisit this topic, but I just wanted to mention it because the name makes me smile. The Stalkers are mostly enemies, though a couple of them are willing to play nice, and we'll meet them occasionally on our travels, them being the Catboy and Fantastic Mrs. Fox. And I'm pretty certain that I saw creepy fan art of them and Pinocchio together at some point because the internet. As I say, most are hostile, and that includes the second boss, who has a big sword and really dislikes puppets. Racist, or puppet-cist, yeah, whatever. Once we've that wasn't the word rescued. Once we've rescued Geppetto, he tells us about a mad puppet king. This paragraph is not going well. Once we've rescued Geppetto, he tells us about a mad puppet king who is controlling the uprising puppets through their Ergo, so hats off to the Krat inventors for developing a wireless network half a century before the internet was ever a thing. The goal now being, get to the puppet king and shove that crown down his throat. See, I was mature that time, I didn't say shove it up his ass. Ah, crap, I just did. After this point, the story mostly takes a backseat to the gameplay, which to be fair, I'm all for, because, as I said earlier, I like a Souls-like best when their narratives are not getting in the way of me doing slaughter. The main plot for most of the game is just to reach the big bad, and that's great, but that doesn't mean that the characters who occupy the hotel won't want to natter on at you for ages if you give them a chance. If you do talk to them, then you'll learn all about the hotel from its sickly creator. The young but spunky weapon-making girl has plenty to say about weapons. There's an eccentric tech genius, who isn't currently being roasted daily on a media platform that he bought, and of course there's Sophia, who herself is uniquely tuned into the Ergo of the puppets, but most conversations will almost always come back around to you being a different puppet. Because Pinocchio is, after all, a special puppet, a different kind of puppet, a unique puppet, all things that people might use to describe their undiagnosed neurodivergent child, but I have to confess, I find this a monumental waste of effort. You see, I know I said twice now about my preference for story in these kind of games, but that doesn't mean they can't be there, or that they can't try to characterise the protagonist. He's so special and unique and impressive, but he only has one facial expression, he never talks, and he has all the personality of the average high school anime protagonist that he closely resembles. Still, despite his utter personality deficiency, hell, most puppet bosses have more personality than Pinocchio does, he's still not the weakest part of the plot. That would be the petrification disease. On the one hand, a plague-ridden town does give us the most visually interesting boss in the game, but on the other hand, it's just a zombie stage, all the infected are mindless and violent, and you can slaughter them en masse without feeling remorse. I remember Bramble earlier this year also had some random-ass zombie stage set in a village, and it was just as unnecessary then. I know zombies are that thing that video games were addicted to for a while, and many indie games still are addicted to, but games need to stop with the fucking zombies. Still, I can't speak for how the plot wraps up because I never finished the game. As soon as I beat the Puppet King and I saw the foreboding cutscene of Emperor Palpatine atop a big thing doing evil stuff, I was like, yep, that'll do, and I put the game down and I haven't been back to it since, and that was like a week ago. I've spent most of my time on Fallout 4 trying to build a nice settlement in Nuka World. From what I saw, the narrative aspect of the game does have some cool elements at play for certain, but it's largely just another robot uprising story, but this time with a human baddie being responsible for the slaughter, which I think is unique. Wait, hang on, isn't that what Steel Rising did last year? Sorry, that was bitchy of me, and that ain't gonna change anytime soon. For the most part, the Pinocchio aspect of the game feels like wallpaper. It does have some good moments, and like with the gameplay, just because I've seen better elsewhere doesn't make this one the worst, but I'll be honest with you, I just kind of stopped caring after a while. It's not that the story was bad, I just found that I'd never really desired to dig deeper into things, so I guess I just wasn't all that impressed. From what I remember when I glanced at the Wikipedia page, shit gets a little fuckier for a while, but then the day is saved, Sophia dies, and I think Pinocchio becomes a real boy at the end, and all is right with the world, because that's pretty much how the fairy tale ends. What do I think of the unique way the game tries to tell the Pinocchio story? I find it a bit lacking. Again, I say the game fails to effectively characterise Pinocchio. As he stands, he's a voiceless video game protagonist with no will, thoughts, or ideals of his own. And across the 10 hours I spent playing the game, I never really felt like Pinocchio himself was getting the attention he needed. We don't seem concerned about the hostile puppets, we don't seem happy to see our creator, we don't seem to need to contemplate killing a crazed human. We're a blank slate which people talk at, which doesn't do justice to the character of Pinocchio. He's a childlike creation in awe of the world around him and attempting to navigate the complexities of the human experience whilst developing his own morals after a few run-ins with unsavoury characters. Maybe it all wraps up nicely in the end, I wouldn't know. I doubt I'd feel any sense of payoff to Pinocchio's story, given that I could replace him at any point with a block of wood or Kristen Stewart and it would have provided the same emotional range. I guess now is a good time to talk about the voice acting in the game, which wasn't bad, it was respectable. Hell, I didn't even notice any particularly bad or lackluster performances, aside from Jiminy, who again I mostly forgot about. He doesn't really play much of a role in the early game and you can completely ignore him if you like.
The petrification disease spreads too fast, and the puppets rampage everywhere.
It's a dream come true. Seeing you like this.
Surely we can discuss this like reasonable people? Hold on. Geppetto's a friend of yours.
Makes me wish Pinocchio had a voice actor. So what are my overall thoughts on the story that I saw? Well, I found the narrative to be a bit underwhelming. A big part of the Souls-like is usually that a lot of the character details and lore is hidden in item description, and this was certainly the case here, but I never felt motivated to read through any of it. I'm still kind of bummed that Pinocchio is so lacking in the character department. He has no emotion, he has no drive, he's basically missing all the aspects that would make me fall in love with a character, and I personally consider that to be a massive misstep. If I could have just seen him react to the killing, or even to the lying rather than getting that your springs are reacting graphic, then it would have made me feel so much more engaged by the character and I probably would have kept going, but as it stands I find Lies of Pile a lot more appealing on the gameplay side than the narrative one. Lies of Pi is a mixed bag for me. It's got some good ideas and some shit ones, and whilst I had plenty of, well, some fun with it, I don't see myself revisiting it anytime soon. Its one unique selling point of being Souls-like but with robots isn't even overly unique. Souls-like but robots has been done already. Steel Rising from last year comes to mind, and I feel it's a far stronger game even though it had some balance issues with the combat. Comparatively, Pinochi-Souls feels a lot less adventurous. Maybe it's the greater linearity, maybe it's the general movement or the fact that nothing interesting was done with the stamina and it just sits there like an unwelcome house guest that you can't kick out because you really want to be nice this year. I think the best I can say is that if I was an educator, then I'd grade Lies of Pi as a solid C, maybe a C- at the absolute worst. It's fine, it's good even, it'll do if I'm bored or procrastinating, but I don't really find that I want to play it for more than 40 minutes at a time, and eventually I hit that point where I'd seen enough and I just didn't really want to keep playing, I had other stuff to do. The last boss I defeated, the King of Puppets, was a pretty cool fight, but as soon as I clobbered him I was like, cool, done now. I appreciate, though, that I may have done this to myself. These last few months, between me playing Code Vein and the Surge titles for reviews, as well as me replaying Dark Souls 1 and 3 and Bloodborne and revisiting the original Lords of the Fallen to see if it was worth a review, it wasn't. I think I've all but burned myself out on the Souls-like. My passion flickers like the first flame, destined to one day go out, but don't worry, there will always be embers in the darkness, and one day that flame will take root again.
Oh, come on. Maybe just one more area, one more boss, see how you feel. Wait, why are you reinstalling Fallout 4? No, wait, what? are you doing?
What? I said I was done. I feel that Lies of Pi was a decent game that brushed up against being brilliant a few times, but never really had the chops to commit to such. A good game though. Not great, just good. I will say though, as I encountered no significant bugs or glitches or performance issues, I am willing to be a little kind, because at least Lies of Pi remembered to release in an appropriate state for sale. Anyway, that'll be all. I'll say this now in case I forget to say it later. Happy holidays everyone, however you choose to celebrate the winter solstice, if you choose to celebrate it, and even if you don't, I hope you have a good few weeks, and we'll see you next year in the almighty 2024. I can't wait for that to be the new official worst year in human history. I give it 2 months.
Close your eyes. Come to me. Feel alright. Just dance with me all through the night. Turn it out. Close to you. I feel good. 'Cause I just know feeling.